For decades, South Africa was considered a cornerstone of Western influence on the African continent. A democratic success story, a strategic economic partner, a reliable voice aligned, more often than not, with Washington's global vision. But today, something is changing. Quietly, deliberately, and with consequences that are sending shockwaves through U.S. foreign policy circles. South Africa, Africa's most industrialized economy, is drawing closer to China and Russia, two powers openly challenging Western dominance in the global order. And this time, Washington isn't just watching. It's worried. Because this shift doesn't represent a single diplomatic disagreement or a temporary political disagreement. It signals something much bigger. A realignment, a power recalculation, and a warning that the rules governing global influence are no longer written solely in Washington. For years, U.S. policymakers assumed South Africa would remain within the Western orbit. Trade ties were deep. Military cooperation existed. Financial systems were intertwined. South Africa was seen as a bridge, connecting Africa to Western markets, Western institutions, and Western political norms. But beneath the surface, frustration was growing. South African leaders increasingly questioned why. Western investment focused on extraction rather than development. Infrastructure promises rarely materialized. Political pressure often accompanied economic cooperation. Meanwhile, another set of partners arrived with a different offer. China and Russia. No lectures. No public criticism. No conditions tied to governance reforms or foreign policy alignment. Just deals. When South Africa hosted joint military exercises with Russia and China, U.S. officials reacted with visible discomfort. When South Africa resisted condemning Moscow at the United Nations, Washington grew more concerned. And when South Africa doubled down on its role within BRICS, the unease turned into alarm. Because BRICS is no longer just a discussion group. It represents an alternative financial and political architecture, one that challenges U.S.-led institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and even the dominance of the U.S. dollar. South Africa is not a passive member of this bloc. It is a strategic gateway, and Washington understands exactly what that means. South Africa is not just another African state. It controls critical mineral supply chains, strategic ports linking the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, one of the continent's most sophisticated banking systems, a political influence that reaches across southern Africa and beyond. If South Africa shifts its alignment, it sends a message far beyond its borders. It tells other African nations, there are alternatives, there are options, and Western approval is no longer the only path to development. That message alone is enough to unsettle Washington. China's engagement with South Africa has been patient and precise. Beijing invested in energy infrastructure, transport corridors, industrial parks, telecommunications, manufacturing capacity. Trade volumes surged, financing flowed, and Chinese companies embedded themselves deeply into South Africa's economic future. From Washington's perspective, this wasn't just competition. It was displacement. Every Chinese-backed project represented influence the United States once assumed it would naturally hold. While China focused on economics, Russia focused on positioning, security cooperation, energy partnerships, diplomatic coordination. Moscow framed itself as a partner that respected sovereignty, a message that resonated strongly in a country with a long history of external interference. Joint military drills may have been symbolic, but symbols matter. They signaled a willingness to diversify alliances, something Washington had hoped to prevent. For the current U.S. president, South Africa's shift presents a difficult reality. Pressure too hard, and Washington risks pushing South Africa further away. Ignore the shift, and U.S. influence continues to erode. The traditional tools, sanctions, warnings, diplomatic pressure, no longer carry the weight they once did. Because South Africa now has leverage. It has choices. And in a multipolar world, choice is power. What makes this moment dangerous for Washington is not South Africa alone. It's the example. Other African nations are watching closely. How South Africa negotiates with China. How it balances relations with Russia. How it resists pressure from the West. If South Africa succeeds in asserting independence without economic collapse or diplomatic isolation, the ripple effects could be enormous. This is the scenario Washington fears most. This isn't about ideology. It isn't about loyalty. And it isn't about choosing sides in a new Cold War. It's about a world where power is no longer centralized, where Africa is no longer a passive participant, and where nations like South Africa refuse to be told which alliances are acceptable. For Washington, this represents a loss of predictability. For South Africa, it represents opportunity. What we are witnessing is not a diplomatic disagreement. It is a turning point. South Africa's growing ties with China and Russia reflect a broader transformation, one that challenges the assumptions that have guided U.S. foreign policy for decades. The question is no longer whether global power is shifting. The question is whether Washington can adapt fast enough, or whether it will continue to lose ground in regions it once considered secure. Because in today's world, influence is no longer given. It is negotiated, and South Africa is negotiating from a position of strength. Have you ever wondered what's really going on with global power? While all eyes are often on the US, China, and Russia, a key player is making strategic moves that could reshape the world as we know it. That player is South Africa. For decades, the nation was largely isolated, grappling with the legacy of apartheid. But today, a new South Africa is emerging on the world stage, and its choices are sending ripples across the globe. This isn't just about one country's foreign policy. It's about a fundamental shift in international alliances, trade, and the very balance of power. So, how did South Africa go from a pariah state to a pivotal force in global politics? And why is it increasingly looking east, towards partners like China and Russia? Let's dive in. To understand South Africa's present, we have to look at its past. The apartheid era, from 1948 to the early 1990s, was a period of intense international isolation. The United Nations imposed sanctions, and the country became a symbol of racial injustice. Its relationships were primarily with Western powers, but they were strained and conditional. The end of apartheid in 1994, marked by Nelson Mandela's election, was a watershed moment. It wasn't just a domestic victory for freedom and equality, it was South Africa's grand re-entry into the global community. The new government, led by the African National Congress, or ANC, had a clear mission: to build a foreign policy based on human rights, democracy, and Pan-Africanism. Initially, this meant mending fences and building bridges with everyone, including the West. But beneath the surface, the seeds of a different path were already being sown. The ANC's historical ties during the anti-apartheid struggle weren't just with Western activists. They were also with countries like the Soviet Union and China, who provided support when many others would not. These historical debts of gratitude would prove to be powerful forces in shaping the country's future alliances. Fast forward to the 21st century, and we see these historical threads weaving a new pattern. South Africa began to actively pursue a strategy of non-alignment, a policy of not being officially allied with or against any major power bloc. But non-alignment in theory can look very different in practice. What we've witnessed is a deliberate and strategic pivot towards the East. A major turning point was South Africa's inclusion in the BRIC group in 2010, turning it into BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. This wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a formal invitation into a club of emerging economies determined to create an alternative to the Western-dominated global order. For South Africa, joining BRICS was a massive boost to its international standing. It positioned the nation as the gateway to Africa, a continent with immense economic potential. Suddenly, Pretoria had a prominent seat at a very important table, shaping discussions on global finance, trade, and development, far from the traditional halls of power in Washington or Brussels. So, why China and Russia specifically? Let's start with China. The economic relationship is undeniable. China has been South Africa's largest trading partner for over a decade. We're talking about billions of dollars in trade, covering everything from raw materials to manufactured goods. Chinese investment has poured into South Africa's infrastructure, mining, and technology sectors. For a country grappling with high unemployment and the need for economic development, this partnership is incredibly attractive. Beijing offers what is often called no-strings-attached investment, which contrasts sharply with aid from Western institutions that often comes with conditions related to governance or human rights. This approach resonates with South Africa's sovereign-minded foreign policy. Furthermore, China's own journey from a developing nation to a global superpower provides a compelling model for South Africa and other African nations. It's a narrative of self-determination and economic success outside the Western framework, a story that holds powerful appeal. Now let's turn to Russia. The relationship here is less about economics and more about shared history and geopolitics. As I mentioned, the Soviet Union was a staunch supporter of the ANC during the anti-apartheid struggle. This created a deep-seated political and ideological bond that has endured. Today, Russia and South Africa share a similar worldview. Both are skeptical of what they see as Western unilateralism and dominance. They advocate for a multipolar world, where power is more evenly distributed among several major countries and blocs, rather than concentrated in one. This shared vision is on full display in forums like the United Nations, where South Africa often aligns its votes with Russia and China on key issues, sometimes to the frustration of its Western partners. The military cooperation is also growing. The joint naval exercises conducted by South Africa, Russia, and China off the South African coast sent a very clear message. It was a demonstration of a burgeoning trilateral alliance, a projection of power that challenges the traditional maritime dominance of the United States and its allies. Of course, this strategic shift is not without its critics and challenges. Domestically, there's a fierce debate. Opponents argue that by cozying up to China and Russia, South Africa is betraying its constitutional commitment to human rights and democracy. They point to the authoritarian nature of the regimes in Beijing and Moscow and question the wisdom of aligning with them. Economically, some worry about the long-term implications of heavy reliance on China, raising concerns about debt traps and unfair trade practices that could harm local industries. Internationally, South Africa is performing a difficult balancing act. Its Western partners, particularly the United States and the European Union, are watching this pivot with growing concern. They remain crucial economic partners for South Africa, and alienating them could have serious consequences. For instance, preferential trade agreements like the African Growth and Opportunity Act with the U.S. are vital for the South African economy. Pretoria's challenge is to navigate these complex relationships without being forced to choose a side, maintaining its prized non-aligned status, while clearly deepening ties with the East. So, what does this all mean for the future of global politics? South Africa's actions are a powerful indicator of a broader trend. Many countries in the global South are no longer content with a world order designed and dominated by the West. They are seeking greater autonomy and diversifying their partnerships. The rise of blocs like BRICS is the most visible manifestation of this desire for a multipolar world. South Africa, with its unique history, strategic location, and continental influence, is at the vanguard of this movement. Its deepening alliance with China and Russia isn't just a foreign policy choice, it's a statement. It's a declaration that new centers of power are emerging and that the old rules of the game are being rewritten. The West's challenge is how to respond. Will it adapt to this new reality and engage with countries like South Africa as truly equal partners? Or will it view this shift as a threat, leading to a new era of geopolitical competition? The decisions made in Pretoria, Beijing, Moscow, and Washington in the coming years will not only determine the future of South Africa, but could very well define the shape of the 21st century world order. The days of a unipolar world are clearly numbered, and South Africa is playing a key role in ushering in whatever comes next. This is a fascinating and rapidly evolving story, and it's one we'll be keeping a close eye on. What do you think about South Africa's strategic shift? Is it a smart move for the country and for Africa? Or is it a risky gamble? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the forces shaping our world. See you in the next one.